Hello again, and welcome back to the What Is That video series. When you work with a large museum collection like we have here at the Esplanade, sometimes you have to stop and think what it all means as a whole. Every now and then I stop and think about the huge collection of artifacts and stories that we have in the museum and archives, and that makes me think about how these stories speak to the past, how they speak about who we are, where we come from, how we got here. These are the stories and artifacts of people's lives. And frankly, most of those people are no longer alive. These are the stories and the belongings of the dead. They're also part of how we remember. This week I'd like to show you 3 artifacts that focus on remembering. So let's have a look at them now. 2 of the artifacts this week are small decorative corsages that would be worn as an accessory with fine clothing. They're intricately made, woven in a curly floral pattern with some extra beads and highlights. They are truly works of art in their own right. What makes them interesting is that they were made in the late 19th century, and they're made from human hair. These corsages are called Memento Mori, and were made to commemorate 2 young girls, sisters of the original owner. One is made from the hair of a girl named Doris, who drowned at Elkwater when she was 15. The other is made from the other sister's hair, Jeanette, and she died of diphtheria when she was 6. The term Memento Mori is from the Latin words memini for remember and the verb morior for to die. They are a reminder of the impermanence of life and that, in time, we all die. In Western thought, the idea goes back to the Roman philosophers prior to the rise of Christianity. One particularly famous philosopher who explored the idea was Plato in his dialogue The 𝙏𝙗, which examines the death of Socrates. The other was Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who, also a philosopher of some note, mentioned this in his works called The Meditations. The idea became more popular through the Christian era, focusing on the concept of sin, the afterlife, and Judgment Day. The concept gradually moved from philosophy to representations in artwork, particularly in funerary architecture, in what are now often called cadaver monuments, which often featured skeletons or decomposing bodies that are intended to remind the viewer that earthly life is brief and the soul is immortal. Essentially, mind what you do with your life, as it's short and you'll be judged for it later. By the later 16th century, memento mori were becoming more common in artwork. They often appear in paintings as a triptych, or a set of 3, very often a flower for life, a skull for death, and an hourglass for time. Sometimes it was just a skull, held or conspicuously placed somewhere in the scene. At roughly the same time, objects began to be made as memento mori. Just like the painting, they usually had a skull as a motif, and many often had a small compartment with a lock of hair from a deceased loved one, a true memento of that person. In the 19th century, these memento mori items became much more common in parts of the Commonwealth. We can largely thank Queen Victoria for that. She was the British monarch from May of 1837 until her death in January 1901. She married Albert Saxe-Coburg in 1840, and by all accounts, they were genuinely devoted to one another. When Albert died in 1861 after a short illness, Queen Victoria went into mourning for the rest of her life. She, along with a good portion of the Commonwealth, wore black to signify their mourning, and Queen Victoria only wore black from that time onwards. Fashion was still popular, but there were very strict social rules and etiquette around mourning. Clothing for men and women was black and formal, and women often wore veils of black netting. Widows were often expected to wear black for up to 4 years, while it was considered appropriate to mourn a sibling for 6 months. Friends and acquaintances of the deceased were expected to observe shorter periods of mourning. Decorative accessories and jewelry worn during mourning often had black stones made of jet, and the wealthy would sometimes commission jewelry that contained a lock of hair from the deceased, or was itself made from their hair, like the 2 corsages we have here. We also have another form of memento mori from this time period that is similar to the corsages. This hair wreath came into the museum not quite 2 years ago. It was donated by descendants of those from whose hair it was made. We don't have a great deal of history on this piece, though we do know that it was passed down through the family from 1865 when it was made. It is easy to see that this item commemorates several people, as there are several different shades of hair used to make the wreath. Like the corsages, it is exceptionally well made, and it must have meant a lot to whoever commissioned it. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.